Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about slipping through the cracks. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, what are some signs that has exposed an inexperienced programmer that slipped through the interviewing process? They made the fatal mistake of being put in a role where people are capable of evaluating the quality of the work and the reasonable output of the persons doing the work. Let me explain that a little bit. So the trick to being incompetent in IT is that you have to work on something where either no one knows what good work looks like, and then in that scenario you have to produce something that is of use, even if it's shitty code, it's sub-quality, etc, etc, because that's the beautiful part about having incompetent people. Everything is complicated. Now the problem with IT is that it's magic to most people, which means that even the really good software developers can say that something is hard. But what the non-technical people don't know is that when a real master level programmer says that something is hard, it is because it is hard for real. When an incompetent person says that it's hard, it's just hard for them. And you can think, in a very philosophical sense, that's always going to be the case, right? Even the master level programmers can have things that they're not so good with. It's just how often is this person going to say that something is hard? And if everything is hard all the time, it's most of the time due to that the person who is doing the work is incompetent. And as an inexperienced programmer, this is the dangerous part for you. If you're put in a situation where you have people who have communication channels to other people who can make decisions and so forth, and notice that everything is always very difficult for you. Everything always takes time. You produce subpar results, and there are, especially this is extra true when you have expectations on you. I've been in many companies at this point and figuring out if it's usually very quick to figure out who is competent and who is incompetent. And usually when you find, especially in the large corporations, you can kind of hide because if you're hired to do something that is not that critical for the mission of the company, or the priorities are sort of no, people need you to do things eventually, but it's not top priority. Their jobs, don't hand in the balance if this when they depend on you. That's a different sort of thing, right? But people get really up in your face when you sit on something that is high stakes, and that's usually where you find the incompetent developers. The incompetent developers are usually only going to be able to stick around if they work on something where either the management is incompetent, or if they work on non-critical stuff where there's no pressure on them to perform. Because when there's pressure to perform, you're going to be people are very careful at looking at basically how well you are doing. So that is the thing that exposes an inexperienced programmer, where you have people who have usually some type of knowledge or some type of, they have the ear of the manager or so forth, come in and just basically see things for what they are. And that usually only happens if there is a reason for that to happen. And I can tell you this much, guys. If somebody moves me to your team, and I'm supposed to be like the tech lead or something like that, and you feel like you're in the bucket of an inexperienced programmer and you're sort of worried, you should be. Because usually I've done this a few times now, and there are many people like me, where you produce results in a certain area, and I have coworkers that have. I've been subjected to this as well. It's not that uncommon. For me, it's been managers, usually, where you have some manager somewhere, and due to political reasons or so forth, they want to figure out, because there's been talk in the office near the water cooler about me, or in my when I've done it, like some other team or something like that, where they have a lot of issues, or like they can't really meet their expectations, etc., etc. And so what they usually do in that scenario is, so in a similar way, it's like how the Americans tried to solve the Colombian drug cartel type of thing. You send in an external party to kind of steer things up, or like inject themselves into the situation. And so when it happened to me, they placed a manager, like just in my team, and then that person's basically got involved in everything I was doing. Sort of I'm not saying micromanagement, but yeah, I hope that you understand. Like, it's just a person who's going to check if, from their perspective, I'm doing a good job. And that's usually down to trust when it comes to management and so forth. When there's as I said, if the stakes are high, the higher ups, they will usually do something like similar to that, because they want to be, because of course their job hangs in the balance as well, so they want to make sure that you're doing your job, etc., etc. So they send someone in, and this is how you expose an incompetent person. Usually you have someone who is perceived to be competent make an evaluation of the performance, and then your entire future at that company is usually down to what they say to the person who questions your experience or so forth. And when I do it, it's usually the same sort of thing, where I get sent in, and they basically ask, can you like take a look at, like, are there things that we could do about the process, etc., etc. And then you basically just go through the code, you take a look at the overall structure of how things are being written, you look at the work process, you figure out who are the main players, what is the dynamic in the team, how do they do their job, what sort of profiles are they supposed to have, what roles do they have within the team, and are they fulfilling those roles to satisfaction in order to deliver good results. And then you make a holistic assessment, basically, and then you talk to whoever asked you very nicely to do this, and you basically give some recommendations based on that. And usually, as I said, it all comes down to one of those things. Either someone has expectations on you where you're not really, like, they get this sensation that you are not producing well, or, like, as I said, if everything is always hard and nobody can ever get the thing that they want from you without a lot of hassle, that's when they start questioning you. Or even if you're really good, if the stakes are really, really high, that's usually when you get exposed. So the ideal position for an inexperienced programmer who goes through who then they can stay in a company for years, it really comes down to that thing. If no one ever questions why everything is hard all the time, or if you work on something that has low stakes, or like nobody's really interested in pushing anything, and you're not like blocking anybody in a meaningful way or anything like that, you can basically sit there and do nothing or be incompetent for the rest of your career, because you're like this minor little inconvenience. But it's only when you shine a light on that sort of incompetence where people start asking questions, and then usually this sort of thing happens next. So what I want you to take away from this is that the signs, or like how you exposed an inexperienced programmer, is usually down to one or two things. Either you have some person who is consistently always saying that there's a problem with everything's difficult, everything's hard, and then there's someone else, or like other departments, where they don't really have the same sort of issues all the time, and then that usually raises some questions. Why is this always so hard? And then people start asking questions, and ultimately someone who is more qualified, or perceived to be qualified, is going to be sent in to do an evaluation of the situation, and they're going to start looking into things. An inexperienced programmer never survives that. That's usually when you should hightail it the fuck out of there as quick as possible, because they're going to fire you when they figure out that if they send in someone good. I mean, if you're really lucky, they send in someone who's equally incompetent, or like not really able to do an assessment, and then you might stay. But it's usually better for you to just immediately realize that, yeah, this is going to be bad for me. And so you can find another job while you still have employment, if you're lucky. And this happens usually either when, as I said, things are always difficult with you, there's always like problems in your department, things like that, or when the stakes are really, really high. And in that situation, you can get like you can get yourself a little evaluator or someone who's like supposed to just oversee you and your team to make sure that everything's running smoothly. What they're actually doing is that they're just a spy. I mean, it's not really a spy, but in a sense it is a spy. It's just a comfort thing, like that. In the office politics of the world, guys, it's very common that higher managers send in someone who is trusted, that they trust, to check the situation, because they don't actually know how things are working in a specific team or a specific department, and then they just make that person their little go-to, so they can have like a feedback loop. Oh, how are things going? Yeah, it's going well, or it's not going so well, and so forth. And then that person basically becomes the proxy man and proxy for that higher up. And it's the same thing, basically. So as tips to you out there who have no ambition of helping IT and just are in it for personal gain, really, like you are the sort of people that let's just hope that we never meet. Hot tip to you, make sure that you're never on any type of main projects where there's a lot of stakes related to what you're doing, and make sure that you're always working in an environment with team members, or like somewhere where your manager is fairly inexperienced, doesn't really know what a difficult problem looks like, but at the same time they don't really depend on that you produce really, really well. That way you can probably cash out for quite a few years while still being completely incompetent. That's a very good recipe. Have a great day.